You're listening to Being Autistic. I'm your host, Shelly, and I am a 50-year-old woman sharing my experiences about what it's like to grow up knowing I was different but not knowing why, how I learned I was on the autism spectrum, and what it's like to be autistic. Hello, and welcome to episode number 4 of the Being Autistic podcast. This episode is called Undiagnosed Autistic Girl in Childhood. So I'm going to give a description, a very in-depth description of what it was like for me to be an autistic girl in childhood, undiagnosed. So nobody knew that I had anything wrong with me. And so what I'm going to do is kind of cover the years from as young as I can remember until just before adolescence, because that brings on a whole different set of problems, as you can imagine, or as you are aware if you are also diagnosed. So let's go with my earliest memories. So I don't really have any memories of myself where I was really, really happy, where I was successfully interacting with other people. I mean, my mom and dad, but other than that, I was in a very solitary world. So I remember being extremely shy, well, what I thought was just shyness, but it was a whole different level. Like, I've never seen any other kids as shy as I was. So some of the things that I did would be anytime anybody came over to the house, I would hide. If I wasn't in the backyard, I was in my bedroom. And if I was forced to be in the living room where everybody was, I would sit behind my mom on the couch and try to just hide my body behind her. And I remember my mom's friend was always trying to get me to talk, and I don't think I'd ever talked as a child to her. I also, of course, did a lot of stimming. Stimming is where you are self-stimulating using repetitive movements. I kind of covered this a little bit in my last episode. So if you're unsure what stimming is, I give some examples in that episode, but most likely if you're listening to this, you probably know what stimming is. So my types of stims were many. I might not even be able to remember them all, because even as I process all of this, I think of more things that I used to do. So the number one stim that I had was sucking my thumb. And that was something that I did until I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. And I also did a couple of other things at the same time. I used to have this blanket, and most autistic people know that blankets they're like a safety item, and I carried mine around with me everywhere. And I used it so much, it just got worn out eventually. And it must have been a early childhood blanket, because I remember having this when I was 9 or 10, and it fell apart, and it was just ratty, and I think my parents wanted to throw it away, but somehow I was able to keep the edge of the blanket, which is like a soft material that I would rub my finger on. So I would rub my fingers on that material, and it was just awesome. And eventually, like I said, I took off that piece of the blanket, and they threw the blanket away, but I kept the piece. And that's actually the name of what this thing was. I called it my piece. I mean, what does that tell you when I actually have a name for my stim toy? So I walked around the house all the time, sucking my thumb, holding my piece, and rubbing it against my fingers. You couldn't even see the bottom of my face. It was just covered with my hands almost all the time. And I'm going to keep going further into the stimming, because there's so many of them that I want to cover. Another one that I had was chewing the insides of my teeth, or of my mouth, I should say, my cheeks. That's the word I was looking for. And I chewed them, and it didn't hurt so much as you would think if you don't do this. It pretty much just was like, the more you do it, the more I had to keep doing it because the skin would become loose and then I would have to bite the loose skin and constantly biting. I remember when I would go to the dentist and they'd be like, do you like bite the sides of your mouth? And the first time they asked me that, well, maybe the second, because this is a story from my teenage years. I was probably 13 or 14. So this might not fit this podcast episode, but I'll tell it anyway. When they asked me, so it looks like you chew the insides of your mouth, of your cheeks. And that was my first, well, actually not, it was like my second or third time that I became mute. So there's no other way to explain selective mutism other than just saying I couldn't talk. And it's not that I didn't know what to say. I probably could have said yes, yeah, that's simple, but I couldn't get it out. And he asked me the question over 3 times, and each time I could not answer. And so, yeah, that happened when I was like 14, I think. But anyway, back to my childhood. The stimming, yeah, I bit my lips, I bit my teeth. I also did this thing where I rubbed my fingers around in my hair. I twirled my hair around my fingers, and I did it in the same spot for so long that I actually got a bald spot on the top of my head. And then, once my mom realized that, she said to quit doing it, whatever. So I somehow naturally quit doing it and just did other things too. So the thing with stimming is there's so many of them that just naturally happen, especially with, when you're told not to do a certain one, you just end up doing other ones more. And so I've always, for as far back as I can remember, would bounce my leg whenever I was sitting, or like you've seen people sitting in a chair and their foot is bouncing up and down just constantly, and that's what I did too. So that covers the subject of stimming. And so like I said, I avoided people to the extreme. And another episode of selective mutism came when I was probably 6 or 7 maybe, and I was in the backyard where I spent a lot of my time, of course, because when you're an autistic child, you just want to be wherever you can be alone, and I was always alone in my backyard. It was a big backyard surrounded by different types of fences on all sides, surrounded by trees. It was my little haven, so that's where I basically spent most of my time. And so I was in my backyard one time, and I was standing back there doing whatever I was doing. I don't remember what I was doing, but I heard a neighbor kid yell from a couple of yards away. He could apparently see me, and he yelled out, "Hey, you with the green jacket, are you a boy or a girl?" And the reason why he asked that was because I had really short hair as a child, when I was that age anyway. And my mom might have cut my hair like that because I was twirling it around so much. That might have been why. So when he asked me that question, number one, there's a stranger talking to me, so I didn't answer. And I also didn't know if I should, I knew obviously that I was a girl, but I didn't want to engage in conversation. I just didn't want to. I pretended that he couldn't see me, and I just went about my business. And so that was that. I just thought of another stim that I did because when I had short hair, I think this is why after I got my hair cut and I couldn't twirl it on my fingers anymore, I had a couple other stims that are coming to me now. See, this is what I mean. Like, I'm thinking of all of these stims that I had. Oh my God, I did so many of them. Okay, so the one that I'm thinking of first was licking my lips. I would lick my bottom lip so much that I developed like a scab. Like I rubbed it so raw, it was like a red sore, scabby, just the whole length of my lip. So that's in a lot of my childhood pictures. Another stim that I did was blinking a lot. I would blink constantly and hard. And I remember my childhood friend asked me, "Why do you blink so much?" Of course, and I didn't have an answer. I just do. And so I think now I might use that segue into the subject of friends because I didn't talk to people. However, I was in school, so I had to. But also, I had a neighbor next door that was a girl that was my age that was also going to school. So we became friends. But this is really the type of friendship that just happens because it's a relationship of convenience, a friendship of convenience, because you're next door. And when you're a kid, your next door neighbors just are your best friends. But, in my case, I learned that it was just because we lived by each other. She didn't want to be friends with me after I moved away when I was 10, I think it was. So, well, we did try to stay friends for a while after that, but I'll get into more about this. So she was my best friend. She was my only real friend when I was in school. So then on the other side of her house was another girl that was also in our grade, and she was also friends with my neighbor. But me and that other girl never really talked. It was always me and my friend and that girl. And then across the street and down the road was a couple of other girls that were in our grade. And of course, all of the, the neighbor kids would end up hanging out outside together. But the difference with me was I don't think a single one of them ever talked to me. And I don't think I ever, maybe in conversation with a group, but they did never like hang out with me alone. And it was always based around this other friend that was my neighbor, the one that was my friend, because they all were friends with her. So that's how I knew all of them. So it was really like a case, I've heard of this many times with autistic kids and friend groups. You will like cling to one friend that you feel comfortable with, but then everybody else that's in your group is not really your friend. They're just always around and you're always around them, but you don't really call them a friend. So it was kind of the deal where, yeah, my mom and dad probably thought I was adjusting well, but in reality, I felt like I was always alone. I felt different from them. And that was exacerbated by my friend always asking me questions like, why do you do this? Why do you do that? Or why don't you know how to do this? Like a couple of the things that my friend had to teach me were how to tie my shoes, how to ride a bike, probably other things as well. I just remember everybody in my grade knew how to do these things, but I didn't. So she taught me, and I thought that was kind of weird considering the fact that, why is it she's like knows everything and I don't. And that was just how my life was. And when I was in school, I didn't really make any other friends in school. She was the only one. But it was kind of a weird situation at recess. My one friend would never play with me on the playground. This was my first sign that she didn't really like me, or she just didn't know why she didn't want to hang out with me, but whatever. So I noticed that on the playground, all the kids would group around each other, or they'd break off into pairs or groups. Everybody did this. And of course, as an autistic child, I was just like, well, why isn't that happening with me? Why is my only friend hanging out with 5 other girls, but she didn't ask me to go over there? So what I ended up doing was just hanging out by myself on the playground. And since I was a hider, like I like to say, I sought out all of the locations in the playground where people would have a hard time finding me. So behind trees, behind walls, in corners of buildings where the corners would like close in together, where there was like a inside corner. That was my favorite place to be. I would sit in windowsills. I would walk around the block. I would just be standing around. I didn't play anything. I didn't play sports or games with the other kids. It was literally like I didn't exist in their eyes. I was just off by myself, not invited to talk to anyone or to play with anyone. But, would I have even if they had asked me? I don't know, because like even in our smaller friend groups in the neighborhood, when we all got together, I just remember not knowing how to act, not knowing what to say. My friend would talk to me, and that was probably the only time that I would talk. And whenever the group would do like neighborhood games, I just kind of half-assed it. Like I would go through the motions, but I wouldn't really be talking to anyone. So it was almost like I was there, but I wasn't really there. And so that's really a good way to explain my childhood. I was there, but I wasn't really there. And so when I think about the activities that I did as a child, I listened to music a lot, of course, because that was my special interest that I've always had forever. Because my mom was really into music. She had a big record player that if you were alive in the 70s or the 80s, you probably know what I mean. They're the big, giant record player inside of a speaker type thing, and I would sit against that thing with my headphones on and listen to all of her records. And as I grew older, I got my own records and my own record player, and basically listened to music all the time when I was home and I couldn't be outside. I rode my bike a lot. That was another activity that I did. I did that with neighborhood kids once in a while because it's easy to ride a bike with other kids, yet not actually be involved with them. So I would ride my bike around. If nobody was talking to me, I would just ride and be kind of around in the neighborhood, in the area. Might go off on my own. It was not like we paired up and talked while we rode bikes. It was more like exploring. So I explored the neighborhood a lot. And that's one of, like, I mean, I don't know if I can say that I was happy. If I had to pick one overall feeling from my childhood, it would be just alone. I was just alone in my thoughts. I was alone physically a lot. I like to ride my bike around and listen to music, but to put it in I'm trying to decide whether or not that was how I coped with being different, or if I actually did enjoy those activities and didn't think about how different I was. I guess music has always been an escape for me, and so has being out in nature. So those were two things that I did all the time, and I'm kind of realizing now that maybe those were escapes because they were the only time that I wasn't required to deal with people. And I mean, when you're alone, there's no feeling different because there's nothing to compare yourself to. So I think a big part of autism is you want to have connections with people, but when you do, that accentuates how different you are, and therefore that makes you feel worse. You've probably heard it's not a phrase, it's not a saying, it's a concept of feeling alone even in a crowd. And that's extremely accurate, because I would feel alone when I was alone, of course, and I would also feel alone when I was with other people, because being with other people made me realize how different I was, and of course that made me feel alone. So that was I'm going to use the word alone a lot, and that's basically a good general word to describe my childhood. And how did I do in school? So a lot of autistic kids, either are really smart and do really good in school, or they struggle because they might have ADHD, which is pretty common also with autistics. I don't think I had ADHD, but I struggled in school. And I struggled for the reason being that I didn't want to do work or homework. So, and my worst subject was math. Numbers basically are like another language to me. I had to retake some classes a couple times. I got D's in math. There was one class that I was naturally good at, and that was grammar or English, whatever. But at the same time, it's not like I got straight A's in it. I would mostly get A's, but a lot of times they were A minuses. They might have been B's. But I didn't, let's just say I didn't fail at grammar. And that's another reason why I like to write and type and use written word for my correspondences, because I'm really natural at that. And also, reading books a lot, reading magazines a lot as a child, that helps you become good at grammar as well. So, horrible at math, good at spelling. I actually won the spelling bee in my 4th grade or 5th grade spelling bee, so that was pretty cool. But other than that, I was just like, ugh. I didn't want to pay attention in school. I daydreamed about what I was going to do when I got home, which was either listen to music, ride my bike, hang out in my backyard. So, yeah, that's like, I got through, but barely. And so, I was the kind of kid that didn't really have any behavioral issues. I was very compliant. So I was quiet, obviously. I didn't talk hardly. So I didn't draw attention to myself. I didn't want to draw attention to myself because I didn't want others to talk to me. I wanted to hide. So that's why sometimes autistic children, they will not be misbehaving and loud and crazy and hard to manage and hard to control. They might just be trying to hide. And that was me. And I think a lot of autistic girls would fall under that category, because girls generally are more even-tempered and they don't want to, they kind of learn early on how to act. And I guess, yeah, for me, I just didn't want to draw attention myself. I just wanted to hide. And so let's move on to my family when it comes to my childhood. So I was an only child until I was 7. And then my brother was born. And so that might have helped me a little bit because I had another person in the house to talk to. And so, yeah, it was maybe being an only child for so long also helped contribute to me not talking. So when it came to cousins, that was also an interesting subject, because so I had this one cousin that was close to my age, and we hung out a lot, just like my neighborhood friend, because we had to. We were relatives. We saw each other at every family function and just naturally talked because we were the same age or close. But like the other one, I also noticed that this one would eventually move on from me. She would start to come to family gatherings bringing a friend, which I thought was so weird. Like, this is a family gathering? Why are you allowed to bring your friends? And so she would sit and hang out with her friend, and then I would be by myself. And of course, being with more than one other person is awkward, so I didn't talk to them. I mean, they might have talked to me a little, we might have hung around a little, but I'm sure you can imagine what it's like for 3 kids to hang out when one's the oddball. It's like a very awkward situation. They're not quite playing together, but they're also not quite not playing together. I think it was basically like I was in the vicinity of where they were playing, but I wasn't doing the thing that they were doing. So that was pretty much another example of that. And of course, she was a girl, and so was my neighborhood friend. My neighbor friend was a girl. And what I've learned, the more that I learn about autism, is that autistic girls have problems making other girl friends. They seem to get along better with boys, and that was definitely true for me because I actually did have a couple of male friends when I was young. They weren't close in like the way that like we didn't see each other a lot. It was just like, hey, you're wandering around by yourself and I'm wandering around by myself, and then we just talked, I guess. And so yeah, it was much easier for me to talk to boys than girls. Girls would always eventually drop me. And this was a trend that happened so many times in my life. In fact, every female friend that I've ever had, except for maybe one or two, would still talk to me after any length of time. And so I'm trying to stick to the subject of childhood here, but I am trying to also explain a little more in depth about each of these things. So basically, my childhood was girls coming into my life and leaving my life, even the relatives, cousins. They were never close. I've never been really close with any of my cousins besides that one, and that was just temporary. So I think that, people sense when you're different and they don't know how to act. It might not be that they don't like you, although as a child, that's what you think it is, because why else would somebody quit talking to you? But of course, now that I'm an adult, maybe that was because they just didn't know how to talk to me. Because maybe, it's not a maybe, it's for sure. Autistic people communicate differently. And so maybe they just didn't know how I was communicating, we just didn't mix together. So that was that. I'm trying to think if there was anything else about my childhood that I want to talk about. I think I covered most of it. My family life was pretty average. Oh, yeah, I should probably go a little more into that. There was nothing ever traumatic or bad about my childhood other than being different. My family life was fine. My parents made a lot of money and were very supportive as far as, making sure I had everything I needed. And since I was an only child for so long, I got almost anything that I wanted. Not to say that I was spoiled, of course. All I really wanted was a bike and records. I was happy riding my bike. I was happy listening to records. And I was happy playing in my backyard. One other thing that I did a lot as a child was swing. So we had a swing set in the backyard. In fact, we had a swing set even in the backyard when I was an older adult, or when I was like an adolescent too. And that swing set became one of the things that I would do. And so swinging involves rocking. You're basically rocking your body, but it's a more socially acceptable way. Rather than, moving in any way that I could, swinging was an acceptable way to stim, basically. And what made it even better was when the Walkman came out and I was able to play my cassettes in the Walkman and listen to my music outside on the swing set, on my bike. So that leads me into what it was like being a teenager. I did this also then. I rode my bike, listened to my tapes, or I sat on the swing set, listened to my tapes, and I could have done those things for 5 or 6 hours without needing to eat, without needing to go to the bathroom, without needing to talk to anyone. Many times would I be outside at sundown, and even after it was dark, just like, oh, it's finally dark, nobody can see me. My mom knows where I am, but I felt like I was safe in the darkness. I felt like I had everything I needed. I had my music, I had my swing set or my bike. I was able to move my body all the time and have my music, and nobody could see me. And I knew if it was dark out that nobody would talk to me because, who's going to see you if you're in your backyard in the dark? And that was my safe space. That was where I went. So you might find that you have a lot of these similarities to my childhood. And I hear these a lot, these same themes, just, retreating to your, whatever is the escape for you. And also just having a lot of stims, a lot of ways to, burn off that energy. And the things that made you feel safe, like to me, they were music, riding my bike, swinging, and darkness. So yeah, hiding myself. And that's been a theme throughout my entire life that I still notice. I don't like being in wide open spaces that are bright with a lot of people. I like dark spaces. I like when the sun goes down. I like being up late because it's quieter. There's less distractions. And I've been like this since I was a kid. So I just thought of another thing that I want to talk about, and that was as a child, this is when I started to have sleep issues. So sleep issues are common with autistic kids or autistic people in general. I didn't want to go to bed because when it was dark, I felt happy and safe as possible, and I wanted to enjoy that. I wanted to stay outside, and then, when my parents would put me to bed, I would know that they were still up doing stuff. And it just felt weird to me. I couldn't relax knowing that there was activity around me. And this has been a thing since ever. So I would get up. I would get out of my bed and walk around my room and try not to make noise, of course. And sometimes I would even open my bedroom door and stand in the living room knowing that they were in the kitchen and they couldn't see me. I got some sort of a thrill out of defying the laws of, what you're supposed to do as a person. Like, you're supposed to go to bed. And me, no, I didn't want to. So I felt this sense of rebellion where I would just love to stand around. I wouldn't even need to be doing anything in particular, just standing and knowing that nobody knew that I was there. It was like hiding in plain sight. Well, when I would be like wandering around into the living room, like, they don't know that I'm up. It was so cool. And of course, I would go back into my room and lay down eventually, but I didn't sleep very easily. I was always up late, laying in bed awake. And I also noticed as a child, I needed to have the sound of a fan or white noise, and that helped me sleep. When I was a child, I had this fan that was made out of metal, and I'll never forget the sound that this fan made. It was like a humming, and it was so soothing. I think I slept way better with that fan on, because even as an adult now, I need to have some kind of a white noise machine or a fan. Otherwise it's good luck with that. So, the sleep thing. Since I was up late, I was tired in the morning. And of course, when you're a child, you have to go to school early in the morning. Oh my God, was that horrible. I couldn't think of anything worse in the world than being woken up out of my sleep and having to change into my clothes and go to school where I had to do schoolwork that I hated, where I had to be around people that I didn't want to be around. It was an absolute worst case scenario for a child. And, they say that not knowing you're autistic is a traumatic thing because you go through life with all of these questions and all of these, wondering why I feel different. Why am I forced to do these things? I feel uncomfortable. I feel uncomfortable with bright lights. I feel uncomfortable with being forced to get up when I'm tired. and I feel uncomfortable with being around people, and I had to do all of that. And so getting me out of bed in the morning involved a parent, usually my mom. A lot of times they would turn on my bedroom light, which of course it just sends shudders down my spine right now thinking about, you know, the bright light when I'm sleeping. I put my blankets over my head. I literally wouldn't get up. They did it because they thought it would wake me up, but instead it just irritated the crap out of me. Instead, it just made me cover my head. I was not about to comply. So basically, they got sick of waiting for me to get up, and they would take me out of bed and bring me to the living room and lay me on the couch and dress me. And this went on probably, even until I was 9 or 10 years old. So I always had this sleep issue. I was so tired in the morning that, on the school bus, I would just, lay back with my head resting on the window. I would have my music on if I could. Of course, that was probably more when I was a teenager, because when I was a really young child, there was no way to bring music portable. So, it was just a struggle. My day consisted of being woken up by a bright light, which was painful, by forcing myself to get up when I was trying to get sleep, by forcing me to go to school, do schoolwork, be around people. I hated it. I hated every minute of school. I didn't even really care for music class, even though I loved music, because they always made you play with instruments with other kids. And, we had to play songs together, and I didn't work well with other kids. And this was even true in gym class. I'm going to talk a lot about gym class now, because I almost forgot to cover that subject. But gym class was, I struggle to find the words to even explain how much I hated gym class. So the first main thing that I hated about it was obviously playing with other kids in a group setting, doing a group sport. And they had us do all the group sports. They taught us how to do any sport that involved being on a team, and team is the opposite of autistic. We want to do things alone, not in a team. When they asked us to pick teams, of course, I was last to be picked every time. And I don't blame them, because I would fumble around and not remember the rules, and I was clumsy. Being clumsy is an autistic trait, and I was always clumsy as a child. I didn't even, if there was a sport that involved a ball, I was not going to be able to hit it. I was not going to be able to kick it where I needed to. So any sport involving a ball, just absolutely horrible. I remember a couple times we had to play volleyball in school, and the ball came to me, and I feared it. It was fear. The ball was coming to me, and they teach you to hit the ball with the underside of your arms, which is, I still to this day don't understand why that's how you hit the ball. That's like one of the most sensitive parts of your body. Maybe it's just autistic sensitivity. I didn't like a big, heavy, hard rubber ball making contact with the inner side of my wrist. And so what I would do is just freeze. When the ball would come to me, I would look around and be like, why isn't anybody else trying to get the ball? And I had a kid in my class that was on my team, and he gave me the dirtiest look when I didn't hit the ball, and, because I think we lost the game because of me, or whatever happened. I don't even know, because I didn't understand volleyball anyway. So that was one traumatic experience of many. Gym class, just absolutely horrible. And another, swimming in gym class was even worse. It was bad enough having to change into a uniform. Don't get me started on the locker rooms because, well, I guess I'm going to have to go there because I'm telling it all. So basically, in the locker rooms, you have to get naked around other kids, take showers around other kids. Absolute nightmare for me. And it smelled, which is, that's a sensitivity that I couldn't stand how bad the locker room smelled. Yeah, so changing into a swimsuit, I remember we had to dig through this bin for a swimsuit and I couldn't find my size. And the ones that I found were wet because they weren't completely dry from the other kids having to wear them, and which was so disgusting. Wearing someone else's swimsuit, not even theirs, just a generic random swimsuit that belonged to everyone, just being passed around from kid to kid. Yuck. Just, ugh. It was horrible. Like, and then to put this swimsuit on and to have to get into a pool and do things that the teacher's telling you to do. And another thing that bothered me as a child was getting my head wet. I'm going to talk about this for a while now because this brings me to this subject. I absolutely hated anything above my chest getting wet. So when we went in the pool, of course, I stayed in the shallow end. I wouldn't get under. But they had this sneaky way of making sure that you got underwater. If your hair was not wet, you couldn't get out of the pool. I mean, this sounds like torture to me. Why was this even allowed? Why were they forcing kids to dunk their head underwater when they obviously didn't want to? So I had to. I guess that was traumatizing as well. Whether or not I went under all the way or whether I just splashed myself with water to make it look like I did, it was just... And then, having to change back into your clothes... that's a thing for me even now. It's irritating. It's stressful to change into a swimsuit, get wet, change out of a swimsuit, change back into clothes. And we had to do this as children. And it was so horrible. So if you're listening to this and you love swimming, maybe, I mean, I loved being in water, but I didn't love the process of getting in and out. I didn't love having my head under. You might relate to that, you might not, but that was a thing for me, getting my head wet. And so washing my hair was always a nightmare too. And I think my mom washed my hair once a week, maybe twice, but she made me do it in the kitchen sink. I would kneel on a chair and she would wash it as I held a towel up against my face, covering my eyes. And when drips would go down my face, like if they would get to my ears, I even remember the sound I made. I would be like, I needed her to know that there was water dripping down my face and I didn't like it. So the towel was wet, of course, and I was holding this wet towel to my eyes, trying to keep the water out, and it was just a nightmare. I absolutely hated getting my hair washed. And I did like to swim, but I did never want to go underwater. But then, against my wishes, of course, my parents made me get swimming lessons, and we had to go underwater there, and it was awful. I hated swimming lessons almost as much as I hate going to the doctor or the dentist. It was just like any of that, like, I want my body to be my own. I don't want somebody to tell me that I have to go underwater. So that was awful, and I don't know how I made it through. Well, one of the things was I couldn't get water up my nose because it would burn, and I don't know how to go underwater without getting water in my nose. I would have to wear a nose plug or plug it with my fingers, and of course then if you plug it with your fingers, you don't have your arms to swim. So I never really was a good swimmer, obviously. I basically just wanted to exist in water. I just wanted to stand in it and push around in it, but not go under. And I hate when my face gets splashed with water. Even as an adult, if I'm in a lake or a pool, I cannot stand the feeling of random drops of water hitting me where it's not supposed to hit me. Like, I want to keep everything from the neck up dry, and I don't care if my body gets wet. I mean, it's annoying when I have to change back into my clothes, but I mean, I didn't hate the act of being in water. It's just all those little details. So autism makes things difficult for you because you're so picky with how you do it. And it's not that I don't like doing things, but I dislike, well, dislike not a strong enough word. I absolutely hated certain aspects of doing these things that I didn't not like swimming, you know. I like swimming. Well, that's kind of a weird way to put it. I like being in water up to my neck. That's the best way to put it. But, you know, it's all the other things. All these like conditions. I can't be underwater. I can't have water splash my face. The water has to be a certain temperature. I can't stand cold water. So it and if you do not have autism, which I don't know why you'd be listening to this if you don't, but you're probably, if you can't relate to this, you're probably thinking that's just so weird. And yep, you're right, I'm weird. And that's probably why I didn't have many friends. Probably why people wouldn't stay friends with me, because I was very neurotic and picky about how things were. So yeah, that was the whole swimming, that was the whole school, being in gym class, all awful, awful things. And you know, I'm realizing now that I didn't even start talking about the bullying, the teasing, which went on my entire childhood, even into my adulthood. But since this is the episode about childhood, I will talk about the bullying. I was never physically assaulted. I was really just, I'll have to give some examples. People not people, children reacting to me in ways like that boy did in the gym class, you know, giving me a dirty look because I couldn't play sports. It was just a lot of that. And also, the girls were absolutely horrible. They were evil. I know children are not, you know, they're not cognitively able to be nice unless, I don't know, whatever, but like my group of my grade school girls were absolutely horrible. If I had a pimple on my nose, this is actually a specific time that I'm thinking of. They would all surround me. They would come around me and surround me so I could not escape. And they said, "We're going to pick that zit on your nose." And of course, I tried to stop them. I wasn't able to a lot. I remember they were holding my arms down and trying to, just, and you know, that was one example. Another example is when I was standing around, I don't know what I was doing, but one of the nice girls, I would say, even though she was obviously part of the popular clique, she came up to me on the playground and suddenly was like really nice to me, and she said, "Let's walk around and talk." I'm like, oh my gosh. In my head I was thinking, one of the popular girls is talking to me. And so I walked with her and she asked me some questions and we talked, and we got to the edge of the playground and she turned around and ran back to her friends, leaving me standing there wondering what the F is going on. That's the one that I always remember because it was so blatant. I mean, she got my hopes up. She made me think I was normal for a few seconds. And then bam, it was like slamming a door in my face. Like, you're never going to be one of us. Don't even think it. And so, yeah, there was that. And it was almost always the girls. I really can't think of any boys that picked on me to that extent anyway. There was a couple boys that would call me puny because I was very small. I was short and skinny, so they would, comment on my size. They would call me pizza face when I started to get a lot of pimples because, when I was 12 or 13 years old, that's when you're going through puberty, and I had horrible acne, and so I was called pizza face. Oh my God, it was just, I was teased for that. I was teased for my being small. I was teased for just not being popular, not having friends. Even my friend that lived next door to me, that was the time when she didn't talk to me no more. She was like part of the popular group, and so she didn't talk to me at school. And I think now that I have finally covered all of the aspects of my childhood. I talked about school, I talked about my home life, I talked about my hobbies. Well, I shouldn't call them hobbies, my interests at the time. I talked about how other kids treated me, and just the basic general feeling of being a child with autism and not knowing it was, I don't fit in with anybody. I want to be alone, but I don't know if being alone is good either. So I'm just going to escape reality. And that's been a running theme throughout my life. So I think I'm going to end this episode now. It's gone on a little longer than my other ones, but childhood is a big subject. And so if you heard any parts of this that you can relate to, then that's great for me, because what I want is for people to not feel alone. And I want people that have not been diagnosed to know what it's like to be an autistic child being undiagnosed and going through life not knowing why you're different, not knowing why kids teased you, not knowing why you just couldn't hold on to friends, why everything was a struggle, why it was a struggle to go swimming, why it was a struggle to play volleyball in gym class, why it was a struggle to get up in the morning and go to school. So that was my childhood. And on that note, I'm going to end this episode. Thank you so much for listening. This was a long one, and I hope to see you again in the next episode.